I want to start by asking you why you and your colleagues were interested in this topic of teens and conflict resolution.
We knew that adolescents have lots of conflict with their peers and with their friends, and we knew that it was really important to adolescents, but we had a sense that it was more important than that. We had a sense that that adults maybe for years have trivialized adolescents' peer relationships and acted as though, well, they really don't matter that much. They're all passing, and our sense was that wasn't the case. That partly you talk to adults who are still traumatized by things that happened in middle school, and very few adults remember middle school in happy terms. And so we felt like, yeah, we should really take a look at this.
Why is it that adults trivialize?
I think that they want to feel like we're beyond it. So adults trivialize peer pressure, and yet if you look at any major law firm and the men, everyone's dressed exactly the same way. And yet we tease adolescents for feeling like they need to dress just like everyone else. We'd like to think we're beyond it, and we're not as far beyond it as we'd like to be, and it matters more and sticks with us longer.
Tell me about your recent research. How did you go about conducting the research?
We started with a group of 13-year-olds in a local middle school, 184 of them, and we interviewed them, but we didn't want to just rely on what they said, so we also interviewed their parents, we gave them various sorts of tests, and we brought them into our research offices with their best friends. And we watched them interact with their best friends. We watched how they handled conflict. And we asked their best friends about the teens. If you really want to know about somebody, ask their friend what they're like. Don't ask them to tell you. And then we followed them repeatedly. And we're still following them, but for this study, we followed them from age 13 all the way up through age 28.
What were you and your colleagues looking for in particular, and what did you find?
We were looking for, among other things, how teens handle conflict. And the idea is that, and it's turned out to be true, that it is not just, do you have a friend, are you happy with your friend, that there are certain skills you should be gaining and developing in your teenage years. And one of them is, how do you negotiate a disagreement in a way that leaves both people still feeling friendly toward one another? And that's a key task for adults as well, but it's one that adolescence is where you really first get to start practicing it.
Is this something that you saw in the lab organically, or is this a learned skill?
It's a learned skill. One of the things we found is that you learn it at home, and that, if you want to ask parents, how do you use the results that we're going to talk about? If you want to ask parents, how do you use these results? The answer is that parents model conflict resolution, and they model it in how they talk and discuss and disagree with their teens, but they model it in how they disagree with their spouses and with other adults, and teens learn that. And so we found there's a really high degree of correspondence between what adolescents see and do when they're interacting with their parents and what they then take into the peer world. The peer world is not some random factor that flies in from outer space to affect teens. It's something that really shows some continuity with what kids have experienced at home.
How long did you follow?
We followed these adolescents for 15 years, from 13 up through age 28.
What were your findings?
Our key finding was that the adolescents who experienced a great deal of conflict in their adolescence, and we measured it in a few different ways across adolescence and into early adulthood, they had higher levels of a marker in their blood of inflammation. It's called interleukin-6, and it has been linked to everything from tumor formation to arthritis to early mortality, to dying sooner than you should. And we found that beginning at age 13 and 14, adolescents who were not able to resolve conflict well had this marker of inflammation, which everything we know suggests is an effect of stress.
What do these findings suggest?
They suggest, among other things, that what happens in adolescence doesn't stay in adolescence, much as we might wish it did, that it has long-term effects, that, the title of our article was "The Body Remembers," that the body, our best guess is, we can't prove this because we didn't experimentally manipulate it, but our best guess is that our best understanding is that the body takes in the effects of stress and it changes our physiology in ways that last, even after the stress is gone.
So that teenage conflict could essentially be harmful to their health years later?
Yes, exactly. And that's, our study is evidence in that direction. It doesn't conclusively prove it, but it is evidence in that direction. We see that even after we account for how healthy they were in adolescence, even after we account for whether they're overweight, even if we account for a whole range of personality traits, the kids with more conflict were experiencing higher levels of this marker in their blood at age 28.
What are some things that parents need to know about the findings of this study?
Yes, they need to know, first of all, that conflict is not something that's trivial, that if their teen is terribly distressed by what's happening in school, it may or may not pass, but it should be taken seriously. And that's probably the first and most important piece of wisdom for parents. The second piece is that they can have real influence by how they talk to their adolescent. Parents can't particularly structure their teenagers' peer relationships. They can't jump into them and influence them, but they can give their teen a model that says, here's how you resolve conflict, or that says, here's a level of conflict that if you're experiencing in your peer relationship, that shouldn't be the case. That's not typical. So the teen that sees screaming and yelling and fighting constantly at home is willing to put up with it with their peers because they think that's normal. The teen that has a much calmer home life realizes, no, that's not normal. I don't want to be in those kinds of relationships. I want to stay out of them. And that teen ends up with a healthier set of blood levels when they're in their late 20s.
Are there things that they should keep in mind when they're talking to their teens and when they're talking to their teens specifically about these relationships?
Sure. The goal is to resolve your disagreement while maintaining the relationship. And it's not just to get your way. It's fine to try to get your way, but you want to do it in a way that maintains the relationship. That if you win the argument but you lose your friendship, you've lost. And to let teens know that, to let parents know that.
How do you coach your kids to do that?
You model for them that you talk about why you disagree if you disagree, and you listen to what the other person has to say. And it's remarkable when we look at these disagreements, a lot of them are disagreements that are resolvable if people were both listening to each other, that their interests are not totally in opposition to one another, that in fact what you want and what I want, maybe there's a way to synergize them, maybe there's a way to bring them together. But if I see it as a zero-sum game, then I'm just going to fight to the bitter end, and it's a bitter end.
We hear a lot about conflict and bullying and other forms of hostility. Is bullying something that's above and beyond these kinds of conflicts?
Bullying is the extreme version. So what we researched was the whole continuum from very low conflict to very high conflict. Bullying would be at the high end. The kids who are bullied, we have lots of reason from our research and from others' research to believe they are a particular risk. They're experiencing an extreme version of these negative consequences, and they have health problems beginning in adolescence oftentimes.
Is there ever a time or a peer relationship where there is no conflict?
We all have conflicts, and conflict is not the problem, it's how it's resolved. You can resolve conflicts in ways that strengthen a friendship, that leave you feeling like, whoa, we really disagreed, but we worked it out. Or you can resolve them in ways that leave both people feel like, I don't like this person, I don't want to be around this. And it's the hostility that comes with the conflict. It's the aggression that comes with the conflict that is most damaging.
I know as parents, you often want to jump in and try to solve your child's problem. In what ways is that a good idea?
There's very little parents can do. Adolescents typically don't want their parents to intervene, even when they maybe could really use it. Physical safety. When physical safety is threatened, then it's a place to intervene. If a child is being massively bullied, if they're a target of ridicule by large numbers of kids in their school, that's a place to intervene. It may be a place to go to the school principal, but it may be a place to say, let me get some help for my child to figure out why this is happening and how we can get them out of this pattern. Those are the places where you can intervene. Anything less than that, you can give advice to your teens if they want to hear it, but they often won't. And frankly, they often understand the subtleties of their peer relationships in ways that are very hard for adults to grasp.
You had mentioned the interleukin-6 as a marker for inflammation. Can you just explain for our viewers who might not be familiar what that marker is?
So interleukin-6 is a protein. It's called a cytokine, and it is released into the bloodstream when there's some sort of threat to the body. And most typically it would be an illness or an injury. But because interpersonal conflict in evolutionary time led to illness and injury, oftentimes conflict is one of the things that leads it to be released. And if it's released because you cut your finger, that's fine, it does its job, and then when your finger heals, it goes away. The problem is if you're in chronic conflict, that inflammation is there chronically, and that's what creates the health problems. That's what creates the risk.
Do you plan any follow-up?
We're following these young people up. We have funding to follow them for the next 5 to 10 years. And so into their late 30s, early 40s. One of the things we're interested in looking at is the extent to which these interpersonal relationships affect our genes, that there are ways in which genes turn off and on. It's called epigenetics, that happen with stress and that are related to aging, and it's one of the things we're looking to examine.